Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling like you could have kept your thoughts to yourself and that silence might be the more powerful option? Or found yourself wishing you could hit rewind on a conversation, not because you were secretly plotting chaos, but because your words didn't add value or might have even caused harm after being uttered? Either way, you're not alone, and I'm glad you're here, because what we're about to explore today has the potential to reshape not just your thoughts, but the way you see yourself reflected in the eyes of others. And so, here's the thing. Truly intelligent men possess a secret, and it's not about having all the answers or knowing every trivial fact. In actuality, their real power lies in knowing when to hold their tongue. They don't waste words, aren't in a rush to fill silence, and are reluctant to say things that can potentially undermine their credibility. The Stoics understood this principle well. They knew that wise, intelligent men don't speak to impress. They speak with purpose, or don't speak at all. And in a world where quick wit and loud voices steal the spotlight, let's not forget, sometimes silence is the sassiest comeback, because we frequently overlook the profound impact of a thoughtful pause, or knowing when to think before we speak. Sometimes what you don't say speaks volumes about your character, far more than any polished utterance ever would. So today, we're exploring 7 things intelligent men never say. Not because wise men are perfect, by any stretch of the imagination, but because they've learned, through experience, that certain words can self-sabotage us the moment they're spoken. And if you recognize yourself in some of these examples, take heart. We've all been there before. So take a breath, settle in, and if something resonates with you in here, stay a while. Hit that subscribe button. And let's grow wiser together as we dissect these distinct phrases. Let's dive in. Phrase number 1, I already know that. A phrase that escapes our lips more frequently than we dare acknowledge. At first glance, it appears innocuous, even empowering and kind of swaggy/macho. Yet beneath the surface, it exposes a vulnerability, a reluctance to venture into the unknown. I recall a story about Rusticus, a Roman statesman and philosopher who had the privilege of mentoring Marcus Aurelius back in the day. According to legend, Rusticus embodied the quiet confidence of someone experienced in various challenges. However, one day, while discussing a complex concept, Marcus Aurelius, then a young student, found himself interrupting Rusticus with a hasty, "Yeah, I know that already," where Rusticus responded with a calm, yet significant look, and then proceeded to elaborate on the concept further, leaving Marcus to ponder his actions while Rusticus continued pontificating. That evening, Marcus reflected on the encounter, realizing his impulsive interruption not only showed disrespect, but also caused him to miss valuable insights that Rusticus had to offer. In that moment, Marcus realized he had interrupted not just a lesson, but an opportunity to see through Rusticus's lens, where Rusticus had traversed paths that Marcus had yet to explore, made mistakes Marcus had yet to face, and noticed details that Marcus likely overlooked. And as Marcus learned from Rusticus, he came to realize his mentor's years of experience had taught him things that didn't come printed in manuals or outlined in training videos, things Marcus hadn't lived long enough to understand. Luckily though, when Marcus found himself tempted to say, "I already know that," moving forward, Rusticus would gently guide him back to humility, helping Marcus understand, when we say, "I already know that," what we're really saying is, "I have nothing left to learn," which is not intelligence, it's arrogance, dressed in the costume of competence. And Stoic philosophy cuts right through that delusion. As Marcus Aurelius warned us plainly, you cannot learn anything when you think you already know everything. Reflecting on his younger self, Marcus came to understand the ego, our need to seem knowledgeable to protect the image we've built, often becomes the very thing that blocks our growth, because it convinces us we're standing on solid ground, when we're really just balancing on pride. Therefore, intelligent men like Rusticus understand that knowledge is not a trophy you win to place on a shelf. It's a river, always moving. always changing. Like the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it is not the same river and he is not the same man." Similarly, I once watched a seasoned college basketball coach listen patiently to his graduate assistant explaining a technique he'd likely mastered decades before. And just like Rusticus with Marcus, the seasoned coach would nod, ask questions, and even thank the assistant for sharing his insights. When Marcus would share things Rusticus had long since grasped, Rusticus still listened attentively, asked questions, and sought clarification, because he understood. True wisdom lies not in proclaiming your own knowledge, but in remaining open to new perspectives and subtle nuances. So if you catch yourself thinking, "I've heard this before," take a breath, listen anyway, not to humor someone, but because you might catch something new, a detail, a shift in perspective, a nuance that deepens your understanding. And even if you don't gain new insights, you are still practicing humility and showing respect. Over time, those intangibles end up making you someone worth listening to. And in Stoicism, this is called mastery of the self, the ability to set aside pride in favor of clarity, and the strength to be a student even when you're tempted to act like the master. In the end, that's the kind of wisdom and intelligence that outlasts all the rest, as this was a principle Marcus Aurelius embodied and passed on to others who later sought his counsel. This humbling experience taught Marcus Aurelius a crucial and foundational lesson, that true wisdom lies in embracing the unknown and recognizing the value of others' perspectives. Phrase number 2, "That's impossible." Several years ago, a scenario played out between Arrian, a student of Epictetus, and a man known as Alexander the Great, who was the kind of leader who seemed to carry the weight of the entire Macedonian Empire on his shoulders without ever showing strain. But there was one phrase Alexander the Great used often, almost like a reflex: "That's impossible." Anytime a new idea surfaced, whether it was a proposal to shake up the economic situation, streamline an outdated system, or even approach a difficult person, leader, or citizen, often he would dismiss it with those two words: "That's impossible." At first, it sounded practical, responsible even. After all, who has time to waste chasing pipe dreams? This kind of thinking might have been familiar to Arrian. However, as Epictetus would have pointed out, such thinking can often be a reflection of one's own limitations, rather than the situation at hand. Therefore, this kind of thinking would have been antithetical to the teachings of Epictetus, who emphasized the importance of questioning one's assumptions and remaining open to new possibilities. However, over time, something became painfully clear. Every time someone says, "That's impossible," it isn't the situation they're describing, it's themselves, their own limits, their own fear. The Stoics understood this kind of thinking well. Seneca wrote that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality, and that's exactly what Alexander the Great was doing. Epictetus would have likely encouraged Alexander the Great to examine his own thoughts and fears rather than allowing them to dictate his actions. By doing so, Alexander might have discovered that his fears were not as insurmountable as they seemed, and that he had the power to overcome them. It's a quiet fear, the kind that doesn't look like fear at all. It wears the mask of logic, caution, and practicality. But under it is the very thing that keeps us small. The belief that if we can't see the entire path, we shouldn't take the first step. Stoic philosophy cuts right through this self-imposed paralysis by reminding us that the obstacle isn't the problem. It's our perception of the obstacle that defeats us. Epictetus taught Arrian that our thoughts and words have the power to shape our reality, and that by recognizing and challenging our own limitations, we can often achieve far more than we thought possible. Arrian had been hesitant to pursue his dreams, feeling overwhelmed by the uncertainty of the path ahead. But Epictetus's words stuck with him. He learned to reframe his thinking, focusing on the present moment and the next step, rather than getting bogged down by fear and self-doubt. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." And that became the difference. As Arrian reflected on his own experiences, he came to understand that when a man says, "That's impossible," he is declaring defeat before the fight begins. And wise, intelligent men, like Epictetus, know that what often feels impossible is just unfamiliar. It's not a wall, it's a challenge to step forward and level up. Arrian came to understand that true strength lies not in achieving victory every time, but in persevering through challenges and setbacks, which is the essence of Stoic courage, not reckless optimism, but disciplined persistence. Because in life we're often asked to do difficult things, and the moment we label them impossible, we close the door to ourselves and a grip load of potential. But the man who learns to take the next step, no matter how small, opens doors no one else even sees. That's not just intelligence, it's wisdom forged in effort. This mindset shift allowed Arrian to achieve great things, as he would go on to apply this principle in his own life, becoming a respected historian and philosopher. Writing extensively on the teachings of Epictetus, where his work would go on to influence many others, including future Roman emperors. So with that being said, years after Arrian first studied with Epictetus, I found myself personally working on a project with a tight budget, a short timeline, and an inexperienced team, where every logical bone in my body told me it couldn't be done. But I remembered the lessons of Epictetus in the middle of the fray on one of those stressful days. And so I asked myself 2 questions. What can I control today? And what's the next small step I can take? Because positive emotion is naturally catalyzed when we see ourselves making progress toward a goal or an aim. Thankfully, I've carried those principles of persistence and incremental progress with me ever since that cathartic time, focusing on what I can control, taking small steps toward my goals, so I can create new opportunities and possibilities for myself that might have remained hidden. Phrase number 3, that's not my fault. One of the most damaging sentences a man can utter is, "That's not my fault." It may sound innocent, even justified, especially when chaos hits the fan at work, in relationships, or in life. We instinctively want to defend ourselves, cast blame elsewhere, and point to a reason, any reason, why we shouldn't be the one held responsible. But here's the Stoic twist. Every time we duck responsibility, we hand over our power like it's a free sample at Costco. Wise and intelligent men get this. They've realized that responsibility isn't about blame, it's about influence. And if you shy away from owning your part, even a tiny piece of the puzzle, you forfeit your chance to be part of the solution. Let's take a page from history. Back in 64 AD, Emperor Nero struggled with the aftermath of the Great Fire of Rome. His first reaction? Not my fault. He blamed the accident, the aging infrastructure, the gods, everything except himself. And hey, some of that might have been true, but while Nero was busy giving TED Talks on why he wasn't to blame, the opportunity to learn, adapt, and lead slipped away. This wasn't new for Nero. He often struggled with taking ownership, preferring to outsource accountability to fate, luck, or others. But what he didn't realize was this. By refusing to claim any responsibility, he gave up the one thing that could have changed his outcome: control over himself. And that is where Stoicism steps in. As Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Because when we say, "That's not my fault," we hand over the steering wheel. We wait for someone else to fix things. But when we accept even a sliver of responsibility, we reclaim control. We shift from being passive to powerful, from being acted upon to taking action. If Nero had owned anything in the aftermath, his planning, his leadership, his readiness, he might have salvaged his reputation and his rule. Instead, his avoidance led to more chaos, more instability, and ultimately a darker legacy. Which brings us to modern wisdom. Jordan Peterson suggests this. Be someone who does things, not just someone who is seen doing things. Responsibility is action. It's saying, what part of this can I own and how do I move forward from here? Even if the system failed you, and even if others made bigger mistakes, by stepping up and taking responsibility for your piece of the puzzle, you shift the entire dynamic. It might be as simple as, I should have communicated that better, or next time I'll double-check before signing off. And that simple act, it builds trust with others and with yourself. It breaks the cycle of blame and turns motionless moments into momentum. The Stoics were all about this. Seneca, in particular, modeled this mindset. He took ownership of his life and actions, even in volatile times under Nero's rule. His writings reflect a deep belief in self-responsibility and personal agency. He wasn't about waiting to be rescued. He believed in taking action, even when that action was hard, because blame is easy. But responsibility, that's where the strength lives. That's how smart men armor themselves up for the wild punches life throws without collapsing into despair or dragging down everyone else, plus their iPhones and emotional support group texts with them. The Stoics remind us we're not here to escape difficulty. We're here to rise above it. And rising begins with a single question. What can I do differently next time? Seneca likely asked himself that same question countless times. And maybe, just maybe, he even whispered it under his breath when Nero was off blaming the universe again, because that is how intelligent men lead, not by finding fault, but by finding a way forward. If you're vibing with these old school lessons, let me know in the comments with something like, "Why yes, I love me some history all up in here," because learning is really just remembering. And that's why it's always super cool whenever stuff is super old. Bonus points if it comes with a toga and some Air Jordan Jesus sandals from the 1st century BCE. Because that's where it's at, right there! Or whatever your heart and phalanges feel inspired to type. And yes, I said phalanges, because that's the classy word for fingers within professional and super formal environments. And I'd love to hear what's been hitting home for you, so drop a comment and let your phalanges fly. Phrase number 4. I don't need any help. One of the most dangerous lies a man can tell himself is, I don't need any help. It sounds noble on the surface, independent, self-sufficient, strong. However, it's a phrase we've been conditioned to admire, especially in a culture that celebrates the lone wolf, the self-made man, the one who forges his own path and carries his burdens without complaint. But the truth underneath is far less heroic. The refusal to ask for help is often not a reflection of strength, but of pride. Pride that's quiet, corrosive, and blinding. It isolates us. It makes us believe that struggling in silence is a virtue. And over time, it erodes the very resilience we think we're protecting. I was reminded of this when I read about Abraham Lincoln. During the darkest days of the Civil War, history paints him as a solitary figure, stoic, burdened, carrying the weight of a fractured nation on his shoulders. But what's often overlooked is how deeply Lincoln leaned on others. He surrounded himself with advisors who challenged him. He sought out opinions that contradicted his own, not because he lacked confidence, but because he understood something powerful. Wisdom isn't born from isolation. It's shaped through the courage to admit you don't have all the answers. During the brutal conflict at Antietam, Lincoln famously visited General McClellan, despite their disagreements, seeking strategic insight. He spent countless hours with his cabinet, often referred to as the team of rivals, because he valued their perspectives, even when they clashed with his. This was not weakness, it was strength, measured by humility. And that's the lesson intelligent men learn. Sooner or later, self-reliance is important, but it was never meant to be absolute. The Stoics were clear about this too. Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the most powerful man of his time, wrote openly about the debt he owed to his mentors, his teachers, his friends. In Meditations, he catalogued the lessons he'd learned from each of them, acknowledging how their wisdom shaped his own. And if the most powerful emperor in the world didn't pretend to have all the answers, why should we? The thing is, many of us do at times. We tell ourselves, if I reach out, I've failed to be strong enough. But that belief, it's a trap. It keeps us locked inside our own heads, slowly drowning in problems we were never meant to face alone. And worst of all, it robs the people around us of the chance to offer what they have. So when we refuse to ask for help, we deny others the opportunity to give. We cut off the mutual support that binds all of us human beings together. I've fallen into that trap myself. There was a time when I thought I had to carry it all. Work, family, the endless pressure of trying to live up to an image of strength. I thought that keeping it together meant keeping it to myself. All it did was wear me down. The turning point came when I finally admitted to someone I trusted, I can't do it alone. What I found wasn't judgment, but understanding and support. And that small moment of humility gave me the energy and clarity I had been missing for years. I realized true strength isn't in how long you can stand alone. It's in knowing when to reach out a hand and when to take one. The Stoics teach us we are part of a larger whole, made for cooperation and mutual aid. Epictetus reminds us, no man is an island, and when we pretend otherwise, we fight the natural order of life itself. So strength is not diminished by asking for help. It's defined by it. Because asking for help requires courage, honesty, and vulnerability. And those are the hallmarks of an intelligent, wise man. So the next time you feel the pull to say, I've got this, I don't need anyone, pause. Ask yourself, is that strength speaking, or pride in disguise? And remember the legend that's on all our American pennies, President Abraham Lincoln, a man who led with wisdom and humility, knowing full well that even the strongest men need others to stand tall. Phrase number 5, I'm too old for that. One of the most damaging misconceptions a man can adopt is, I'm too old for that. This belief often sneaks in, disguised as practicality or self-deprecating humor. Yet at its heart, it reveals something heftier, a resignation, a mindset, and a belief system that suggests that the best chapters have already been written, and that the carpal tunnel from writing so damn much is just getting way too gnarly to manage, and that the door to growth and adventure is caving in because my hand is just way too much of a tragic Johnson alert to function. So I'm just unable to write the next chapters of this book. It's excruciating. So this shit is bananas. B-A-N-A-N-A-S. And regardless of the Gwen Stefani action in here, this perceptual framework still represents the kind of thinking that closes doors long before they ever even needed to be closed. And intelligent men understand this phrase isn't just limiting, it's toxic. And it can snowball into becoming a slow erosion of purpose, a quiet surrender of the life that's still got chapters left to be written. I once read about a man named Harry Bernstein. At 93 years old, after spending his life working as a magazine editor and raising a family, he decided to write his first book. He called it The Invisible Wall, a memoir about his childhood in a poor English town divided by religion and prejudice. It was rejected by several publishers before it was finally released, and Harry was 96 when it hit the shelves. That book went on to international acclaim, translated into multiple languages, touching the lives of people all around the world, inspiring him to go on and write 3 more books after that. And it was compelling seeing the youthful enthusiasm coming out of him as he was propelled by the vibe of inspiration over the antithesis of that, which Joseph Nguyen coins as the vibe of desperation. As Harry Bernstein was a man that simply never operated on that if it was too late vibrational frequency. The man was straight up playing Never Have I Ever and was wanting to have less Never Have I Ever chapters to accompany the Gwen Stefani carpal tunnel situation that was stated in the beginning. What's mad fresh about this guy too is that the man had something to say, something to create in some chapters that still needed to be written. And what struck me most about Harry's story was not the success, but the courage and persistence he exemplified over that 3-year span from age 93 to age 96, before his first book started popping off at Barnes & Noble. During those 3 years, the man believed that life still had more for him, and that even in his 90s, the man was just never finished growing. And that courage isn't exclusive to men like Harry, by the way. It's a choice we all face, sometimes on the daily, especially if there's an overload of carpal tunnels cramping in action while featuring Gwen Stefani. And the question always is, do we listen to the voice that says we've missed our chance because my hand hurts holding lead pencils that are non-old school number 2 pencils? Or do we embrace the possibility that as long as we have a pulse, we simultaneously also have purpose? And Marcus Aurelius reflected on this truth, reminding himself that death was inevitable. However, until it comes, our duty is to live as fully and as purposefully as we can. He believed that wisdom often comes with age, not because of the passing years, but because those who remain curious and courageous deepen their understanding over time. Therefore, growth doesn't stop with age, it ripens. I've seen men in their 60s and 70s learn new trades, start businesses, mentor young leaders. I've known others who let the weight of regret and time convince them to retreat from life. The difference is not circumstance, it's mindset. A man who says, "I'm too old for that," has already closed the door. But a man who asks, "What can I do now?" opens it wide open again. The Stoics taught us that age means nothing to the soul. And wow, would you look at that? My hand isn't feeling like a moron anymore for some reason. It's a miracle. And age doesn't disqualify us from living boldly, it gives us more to offer. Because experiencing clarity and not having my metacarpals tunneling my hand through a tunnel of carpals isn't a sign of someone who's finished. They're signs of someone who's just getting started. And that is the Stoic path, to keep learning, keep striving until the very last moment. Because as long as we are here, there is still work to be done. Phrase number 6, I'll do it later. There are few phrases more seductive and more destructive than the infamous phrase, I'll do it later. It sounds harmless, rational, and even a promise to ourselves that we'll get to it eventually. But the truth is, later becomes the graveyard where most of our best intentions quietly get buried. Wise men understand this, and many have learned the hard way that delaying what matters doesn't buy you time, it robs you of it. Every time we tell ourselves, I'll call tomorrow, I'll apologize next week, I'll start that project when things settle down, we are gambling with something we have no control over: time. I once knew a man named Larry who was successful by any measure. A thriving business, a beautiful family, respect in his community, but he was always so busy. Too busy. He often told himself that he'd spend more time with his aging father later, when things at the office weren't so hectic, postponing the fishing trip they had planned and pushing back the visiting where the two of them could just sit and talk. And then one day, later ran out. His father passed away suddenly, and Larry was left with a phone full of drafts he never sent and a heart full of things he never said. Larry shared this with me once, years later, not for sympathy or pity, but as a warning. We think we have time until we don't. The Stoics were painfully clear about this reality. And Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily of his own mortality. A prominent Stoic saying about death is memento mori, which translates to remember that you must die. This concept of Stoic philosophy isn't meant to be morbid or Debbie Downer depressing, but rather to encourage mindful living and a deep sense of appreciation and gratitude for the present moment, knowing that life is finite and quite malleable. He wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." That's not just a philosophical thought experiment. It's a practice, a mindset that intelligent men adopt because they know the clock isn't in their hands. Time doesn't wait for us to be ready. It doesn't care about our plans or intentions. What we delay today, we may never get the chance to do tomorrow. And that's why wise men act so often and emphasize the now. They make the phone call they've been putting off, take the first uncomfortable step toward healing a broken relationship, start the project that's been sitting in the corner of their mind and gathering dust and doubt as a refugee of procrastination nation. Not because it's easy, lad, but because they understand. Waiting for the perfect moment is a dangerous game that almost never pays off. I've experienced this in my own life. There have been conversations I postponed because I didn't want to deal with discomfort. Letters I didn't write because I thought there'd be time. But when I finally stopped waiting and acted, something powerful happened. Clarity replaced regret, and I realized the importance of action in relation to our authenticity. Jay Shetty once stated in his podcast, "Action without intention is meaningless, and intention without action is impactless." So, don't act out there simply just to act. Have a purpose, have an authentic intention, and act upon that intuition. So that way you don't force. And instead, you can start to flow. The Stoics teach us to live life in the now fully and with urgency, because later is an illusion that can keep us too comfortable until it's too late. Therefore, the man who acts in alignment with his intentions refuses to leave the important things undone and takes action as an antidote to overthinking and as a cure to the excuses that prevent us from acting. So that way, Procrastination Nation is further away than geographically because opportunity doesn't knock twice. It fades quietly while we're busy waiting for everything to settle down. Phrase number 7. That's just how I am. One of the most limiting beliefs a man can hold on to is summed up in this phrase, "That's just how I am." It sounds definitive, like a full stop at the end of a sentence. But what it really signals is a quiet surrender and a subtle yet impactful decision to stop growing. Intelligent men avoid this mindset because they understand a truth that many ignore. We are not fixed beings trapped by old habits or past identities. Who we are is shaped by what we choose to do over and over again. And the moment a man declares himself incapable of change, he isn't defining his nature. He's refusing responsibility for it. I've seen this play out too many times. A man loses his temper often, and when called out, he just shrugs and says, "That's just how I am." Another man avoids meaningful connection because he's uncomfortable with vulnerability and tells himself, "That's just who I've always been," posing as fractionated statements of fact, when in reality, they're just excuses. Excuses that allow fear and inertia to masquerade as self-awareness. But deep down, what they really reveal is resistance, resistance to discomfort, resistance to the difficult process of change, and resistance to the reality that no man is ever finished becoming who he's meant to be. The Stoics confronted this issue head-on, teaching us that we're not prisoners of our temperaments, our past, or our impulses. Instead, Epictetus said, "It is not things themselves that disturb people, but our judgments about those things that truly disturbs us." Likewise, it's not our nature that limits us, it's the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. Change is uncomfortable. It requires self-examination and a willingness to let go of the familiar, even when that familiarity has become a source of pain. But the Stoics also believed self-mastery was the highest calling, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary for a life of meaning and purpose. Growth demands honesty, which sometimes demands that we ask ourselves harder questions, more uncomfortably emotionally provoking questions too. Questions that are deeper, getting closer to the roots of an apple tree that started breaking bad because it has intense PTSD from what Adam and Eve did with their last encounter with an apple tree. Questions like, am I acting this way because it's truly who I am, or because it's easier than doing the work to change? Or am I pursuing this goal or relationship because it aligns with my true values, or because I'm trying to meet someone else's expectations? Intelligent men choose the harder path and not the path of least resistance. Why? Because they recognize that wisdom isn't a trophy you earn and display. It's a practice, a commitment to becoming a better version of yourself each and every day, not because you hate who you are now, but because you respect yourself enough not to stay the same. Bruno Mars sings a song that goes like this.
Oh, you know I'd never ask you to change. If perfect's what you're searching for, then just stay the same, 'cause you're amazing, amazing.
Just the way you are.
Yeah!
And you know that line is cute and all, but in reality, I think that we should all respect ourselves enough to not think that we are ever, because we're amazing, just the way we are. Yeah, And the Stoics remind us, life itself is change, or fundamentally, nature is change, and to resist it is to deny the very essence of being alive, and the man who understands this doesn't fear change, he welcomes it. He sees himself as a work in progress, unfinished but willing. And in that willingness lies true wisdom. So if you've ever caught yourself saying one of these 7 things, trust me, you're in good company. I've been there too, more times than I'd even like to admit. But here's the good news. Intelligent men aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who recognize them and choose to do better. And that's exactly what we're doing here today with this video, Becoming Better, one thoughtful and meaningful choice at a time. And I'm curious, which principles hit home for you today the most? Whatever it is, this is your invitation to take the next step. Because wisdom isn't about being perfect. It's about staying curious, staying humble, and always moving forward. Also, if today's conversation sparked something in you or made you think about someone in particular, feel free to share this clip with a friend or family member who's walking or is aspiring to walk this same path. You never know how one moment can help catalyze change or make change feel more feasible out there in this wild yet wonderful world we live in. So, stay up and stay blessed out there, all you filthy animals, and I'll catch you all on the flip side. See you in the next video.